former Fox News host Tucker Carlson offering a defense of New York City's Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani.
Throughout his campaign for mayor, Mamdani was accused by some of holding anti-Semitic views, something which he and his supporters vigorously denied. Now, Carlson argues that those claims are wrong, writing in his newsletter. Is the incoming mayor a fan of Israel? Does he want America to fight its wars? Not particularly. But a Jew hater? That's a different conversation. We've never seen anything to suggest he falls into that ugly camp, because he doesn't.
However, despite defending him from the claims of anti-Semitism, Carlson is still far from being a supporter of Mamdani. He said he fears for the future of New York City after Mamdani's win, saying, quote, "Cities are incredibly complex organisms, take centuries to build, but can be destroyed very, very quickly."
But conservatives who are more supportive of Israel still blasted Carlson for his newsletter. Senator Ted Cruz writes on X, "Now Comrade Tucker is defending Comrade Mamdani. I guess they share mutual enemies." And conservative YouTuber Vince Dow says Tucker's immigration monologues in 2018 literally inspired me to publicly do politics. He was vital to my ideological evolution. I know he was to Charlie Kirk, too. To see him now embrace the enemy like this is just sad. The Tucker of 4 years ago would have rightly shamed the self-admitted foreign invader for taking power in the United States. What happened?
But there are others who backed up Carlson's comments. Journalist Isaac Saul, who is himself Jewish, writes on X, "There is really very little evidence Mamdani is an anti-Semite. He has the support of several prominent Jewish leaders who know him well. He has campaigned, staffed for Jewish polls, and I've personally not heard him utter a single anti-Semitic word." This all comes in the wake of Carlson's controversial interview with far-right influencer and anti-Semite Nick Fuentes. That interview led to an uproar in conservative circles online, with some arguing that Fuentes should not be platformed because of the comments he's made against Jewish people.
The president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, initially defended Carlson's interview, but backtracked on those comments earlier this week in a lengthy apology to his Heritage Foundation staff.
So here we are again with Tucker Carlson and the issue of anti-Semitism and the right and all of that. It will not surprise you to learn I agree with what he said about Mamdani. I don't think there's any evidence that Mamdani is an anti-Semite. I think Mamdani has been vigorously critical of Israel's conduct in Gaza. I noted just yesterday there was some awful attack where swastikas were painted on, I think, a school in New York, and Mamdani was out immediately describing that as disgusting and talking about standing up against anti-Semitism. I do just have to take issue with Vince Dow is not someone I'm aware of, but was he referring to Mamdani when he was saying about foreign invader? Like that,
I believe so.
That seems like ludicrous language to use. I mean, you can, of course, argue Mamdani's political beliefs as you can with anyone, but that sort of rhetoric I find completely reprehensible.
I view Mamdani's stance on Israel probably the least interesting thing about him. He's mayor of New York now, or will be in the new year, and unless he actually tries to arrest Netanyahu when he goes to New York for some reason, his views on it are really irrelevant, I think. And Andrew Cuomo, actually, the reason why his campaign was so terrible was because he focused so heavily on that issue, as opposed to countering Mamdani on some of his actual policies. I mean, I obviously work for the Daily Caller. It was founded by Tucker Carlson. I consider him to be something of a mentor. Over the years, he's been incredibly gracious to me. And I do think it's sad how many people have really just like tried to throw him under the bus over this Fuentes interview, which when you actually watch it, now I will say that he was tougher on Ted Cruz than he was Nick Fuentes, and there's a reasonable complaint to have there. But actually watching the interview, Tucker did challenge him on a lot of his sort of collectivist views from a right-wing perspective, right? He brought up the fact that Christians don't believe in blood guilt, that the idea of blaming an entire race of people or an entire religion of people for the sins of some, or a country's policy is not in line with Christian thinking, trying to appeal to Fuentes as a Catholic. And Fuentes sort of doubled down and was like, what? There's something unique about the Jews and Jewry in America. And so it actually was an illuminating interview. It didn't have the tone that people preferred. And Tucker addressed this criticism recently with Megyn Kelly, where he said, you're not my editor. and I actually don't owe it to you to use my platform in a way that pleases you, which I thought was pretty telling. And the whole Heritage Foundation complaints as well, just having friends on both sides of it and watching it all play out as a member of the conservative, I wouldn't say movement because I'm not really an activist, but being conservative and knowing a lot of people at Heritage, I didn't think that Kevin Roberts' initial statement was like the perfect thing to say. I actually thought he probably shouldn't have said anything. The whole reason that it came up was because there was something removed about Tucker from a donor page, and people were speculating about what that meant. And so Kevin Roberts sort of came out and said, well, this is what I think about the issue. And it made some staffers angry. But then what followed was really what I would view as what left-wing organizations do when they're frustrated with people that they're working for, which is they run to social media, they leak things internally, and they try to basically smear their boss. And that's not a productive way, I think, to change an organization or to demand some kind of change or different direction from the person who is in charge of the organization. It reminded me of the New York Times revolt when they ran the Tom Cotton op-ed, of people going to Twitter and saying that it was putting Black lives in danger of New York Times staffers. And so it just felt very illiberal to me. And especially recently, there was a document that leaked that the anti-Semitism task force at Heritage was making a list of recommendations, which is code word for demand, where they have to engage in all of these different sort of like struggle sessions, including like the offer to attend Shabbat dinners. And one of the women who offered to host the Shabbat dinners is a friend of mine, Bethany Mandel, and I don't think she meant it that way, but the fact that it was coming in the aftermath of all of this public consternation really gave the impression that they were trying to really cajole staffers into signing on to things that they don't necessarily agree with or don't feel like they should be required to do because somebody else from an entirely different organization did a podcast that they disagree with. And so just the entire saga, I thought, was so unfortunate, especially right before the elections. It was such an unnecessary distraction, again, over a podcast that has nothing to do with Heritage. Sorry for allowing me to rant. People have been asking me about it all week, so that's how I feel.
Absolutely, and I like having the time to hear your full views on it, because it's happening much more in your world and in terms of the conservative, the conservative ecosystem than mine. In terms of the Tucker interview, for a start, I didn't watch the whole thing because I just have no personal interest in hearing Nick Fuentes at great length. I know enough about what he believes to not particularly want to listen to him. Tucker Carlson has the right to bring him on if he wants to. I think it would be better if most people ignored Nick Fuentes, but people more familiar with the workings of the right say that is basically impossible now because he has attracted such a following, or he has got so much traction. As someone who myself has been pretty critical of Israel in relation to Gaza, I said yesterday the same thing to Robbie that I'll say to you now. I don't want the support or allyship in that respect of people who are motivated by anti-Semitism. And so, there are reasons, I think, very good and legitimate reasons to be appalled by what Israel has done. I don't think disliking Jews is a legitimate reason for any position. I think it's appalling just prejudice. In relation to how it was handled at Heritage, I'm looking at this very much from the outside. There certainly was obviously some leaking. I did think at the town hall that was done, I'm not sure who the woman was who confronted Kevin Roberts face to face, but I thought that was impressive because she just got up and gave her view to her boss, effectively, and that was worthwhile. And just one thing I'll say on the Mamdani-Cuomo point, I do take your point that the mayor of New York is not creating policy in relation to Israel. I think for a lot of people on the left who are critical of what has happened in Gaza, it became a judgment issue. In other words, an issue that illuminated someone's judgment. So Mamdani's forthright criticism of it, juxtaposed with Cuomo's willingness to literally join Netanyahu's legal defense team, I think that cost Cuomo badly in the Democratic primary, as it frankly should have done.
Yeah, all right. Well, ending on an area of agreement.
Yes.
More rising after this.